Can you hear me now?
A 38-year-long German socio-economic study published just last year looked at the lives of 11,000 families and was really measuring two things, the happiness of their life and the longevity. And it turns out, abbreviating the study, that people who are learners and carers live longer and live happier, which probably is not rocket science to a lot of people. My guest on the program is Dr. Patricia Ferris, who has spent over 40 years, if I can say it like this, in the loving people business. She is a mental health counselling professional, an award-winning, internationally recognized expert on the topic of workplace harassment and bullying. For a decade, she led or co-led an international group of therapists in developing treatment for protocols for those who have been the targets of workplace bullying. Her academic career is she has a master's degree in clinical social work and a Ph.D. in industrial organisational psychology. Pat's Ph.D. in organisational psychology was founded on the quality of life issues in the workplace, which I think is a stunning subject and one which is very, very important. I've been commenting recently about the level of workplace bullying in this country and the workplace death rate. And we're going to have a conversation about some correlation between those two things. Kind of in essence, Patricia loves people and wants to see people well loved. Dr. Patricia Ferris, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, John, and thank you for that very lovely and kind introduction. It is certainly true. I care deeply about people's experiences in life. And not only do I care about my clients, but my clients have taught me so much about life. And sometimes in my time of greatest stress in my own life, clients have given me an uplift when I see them deal with all the things that they're confronted with.
And people are confronted with some fairly nasty things these days, aren't they? The incidence of workplace bullying and really cultures within workplaces being less than helpful is on the rise. Well, certainly is in our country. I mean, what are you experiencing in Canada for those topics?
Well, Canada's noted for being a very nice country with very nice people in it, but the stats on violence and workplace bullying don't support that. That doesn't fit. The data doesn't fit the model. We've had early studies that showed in at least unionized public environments where people, 70% endorse some experience of workplace bullying. I think the last sort of study that really came out showed that 40% of our workforce reported exposure to bullying, defined as at least once weekly behaviors over a 6-month period of time. So is it going away? I don't think so. We certainly over the last, 20 years for Quebec, but 10 years for the rest of the provinces have been developing occupational health and safety legislation that addresses that and holds organizations accountable for training, prevention, monitoring, repairing. At the recent International Association on Workplace Harassment, Bullying and Harassment conference, there was presentations from around the world saying, we need legislation, obviously, but it's not stopping or actually changing the incidence of bullying. And I think that it has had some unintended negative consequences because now organizations get incredibly defensive immediately when somebody goes to a formal process of workplace bullying because they're afraid of being sued. And now we have all sorts of manipulative, damaging actions on organizations' parts to protect themselves. So it's an interesting time, to say the least.
It is, and I'm glad you mentioned that because it seems like our default position, I often say this to leaders, that when relationship fails, we default to regulation. We try and get regulation to fix problems. Well, you can't fix somebody's ideology by regulation. You can't fix someone's brokenness by regulation. So yeah, I'm totally with you on that. And it's interesting because one of the reasons I reached out to you was based on this tragedy a week ago in the United States and a failed assassination attempt on a former president. And yes, there's lots of conversation and conspiracy theories around that, but my question is based on really on the American poet Walt Whitman, who said, "Be curious, not judgmental." And my question is, and to your point about regulation and legislation, is we want to know why. We want to have understanding of why people end up in these positions. Why do they end up bullying and picking on other people? And that for me is the question. Why did a 20-year-old young man end up thinking he could shoot a president? And personally, is it okay if I call you Pat?
Yes, everybody
Yes.
does.
Good, good.
Please.
So Pat, my question, around, or my query over there is, did this young man not realize that he was going to die that day? That for me opens up a whole other conversations. How did he get to the point at 20 years of age, just a baby? How did he get to that point of deciding he was going to pick up a gun? Turns out that he was bullied for his lifetime. His friends said he was a loner and he was bullied all of his life. You must have come across people or situations or have understanding of the changes in the brain structures. This is my understanding, that our brain changes when we've been bullied. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, actually, I was part of a working group over the last year or so that reviewed all the studies and looked at the neurobiology of workplace bullying. Um, and we do now have MRI studies, good studies, uh, of what changes happen in the brain. See, I think in addition to um, experiencing workplace bullying, more damage occurs when nobody steps in. When schools, organizations turn a blind eye to it and people try and get help, we have layers and layers and layers of injury. So what the studies are telling us is that, obviously there's old studies on the inside of our brain, the limbic system, where the hippocampus, where learning and emotion regulation occur, shrinks under extreme stress. So we know that's happening, but we also are finding that there's changes in volume and functioning of the prefrontal cortex, where moral decision making lies, um, uh, and the anterior, um, the ACC, where goal discrepancy is processed. So what I find with people who are bullied is when they have these layers and layers and layers of injury, there's no justice, nothing, nobody steps in. The injury deepens and deepens and deepens. In the area of the gyrus, in the area of the prefrontal cortex, so that you get people that are dysregulated emotionally. They can't regulate their emotions. They're angry. I just presented on a process of what I call going from exposure to betrayal of whatever institution or leader to not manage anything, to the dissonance between what is and what ought to be. So you get a moral dissonance. If that's not addressed, you get moral injury. And if you get moral injury, looks like complex post-traumatic stress disorder, but it's even deeper than that. You get moral outrage. Now, moral outrage is, of course, normal and understandable, but it's deepened now by social media. It's deepened by pulling people in. And then I think you get this, what we call generalized negative reciprocity. You pull everybody in, everybody's negative. You get support for your distress, your negative thinking, and you get in this toilet bowl that you can't get out of. And ultimately, what I find, people either fall into absolute despair and never get out of it, or they get into revenge. And that's where um, people will, certainly in the legal system, there's research on this. That's where people will kill for revenge, and there's clear literature and research on that. So um, it makes sense to me. that if somebody's chronically bullied when their brain is developing, when they're not getting support, that the brain shifts into outrage, and you find a target. And the ultimate revenge can be, I will kill you.
Injustice is such a blight, isn't it? Because that feeling of I'm trapped. No, why isn't anyone seeing me? Why isn't anyone hearing me? I've run some interesting workshops over the years on how to heal the team once the bully has gone. It was the title of the workshop. I've had grown adults sitting at the other end, of the computer, of the Zoom, when I talk about some of the effects of bullying and just ticking off some of the feelings. Grown men and women breaking down and weeping, and I thought, goodness, this is a much bigger subject with much bigger emotional impact. And so it's driven me to ask the question, why do people do this, and really wrestle with why do people engage in these behaviors. And one of the things I love about reading about your work is you're not just interested in helping heal those who have been a victim of bullying, but you're also interested in healing and understanding the people who perpetrated bullying. That puts you in a slightly different category, I think, to most, because we adopt some pretty tough positions on if we know someone has bullied someone at work, because they'll get fired, or there'll be fines, as you say. And so tell me about that portion of your work, understanding the balance between the two personalities involved.
Well, there is an expert that is way more expert than me, called Laura Crawshaw, of the Boss Whispering Institute. Laura and I are good colleagues. I took her training. Laura feels that most people who bully aren't terrible and bad people, but are just blind to their behavior. And she has a whole coaching process that has been very successful with someone who is just blind. I do believe that there are people whose personality is narcissistic, that can be very abusive. That that actually, I've had many people that have been sent to me saying, "Yeah, I know what I was doing, and I did it to hurt people. I did it to protect myself. I did it for my career. I did it because my organization asked me." Long ago, I saw a senior leader in a company that had just um, bought a new company, and they had too many employees, and he was told to ride them very hard so that he could get rid of 20% of the employees. And he was sent to me because he did a bad job of that. He got rid of 80%. They said you bullied too much. So I think many managers are threatened by people who are outliers in their group. The kind of person I see that's frequently targeted is somebody who's very good at what they do. They're a very good performer, professional. They're very conscientious. They're not politically aware, so they don't see what's going on around them. And they have what we call a strong belief in a just world, rules and order, and we follow procedures, um, and things like that. That often makes someone an outlier. It often makes someone annoying. And if you have a leader who has a weak ego, maybe it's big, but it's threatened, that is the kind of person that will bully. My good colleague Evelyn Field, deals a lot with school bullying and workplace bullying. She's written a number of books. She's in Australia, your next door neighbor, should I say. But she says that most of her clients have been bullied in school. So, you know, bullying in school predicts probably being vulnerable at work. And it also predicts if you're the bully in school and nobody deals with you, you're likely to go into the workplace and be the bully there because you've developed a strategy of dealing with people that makes you feel powerful.
Yes. And so you would believe, I'm thinking of Dr. Evil and Mini-Me here. I mean, that one replicates after another, that if you have been bullied, if that's the home experience, the parental experience as a child or in the workplace, that little bullies or people who have been bullied grow up to be big bullies themselves. Is that I mean, obviously not in every case, but there would be a lot of evidence towards that.
Yeah, there's a lot of practical evidence from therapists and coaches that see perpetrators. So, I mean, I've seen people that have come to me devastated about their behavior and really wanting to change. They really were blind, or they were so stressed and pushed by their organization that they behaved in ways that what they be morally ambiguous situations are pushed by stress, that they on reflection behaved in ways that was not consistent with what they value. And organizations will push leaders, they will train leaders, they will train people, they will set up competition, they will make it okay to behave like that. And under those kinds of norms, people are going to behave that way because we're a group species. you know
Yes.
the old social psychology of in-group, out-group, social norms, how easily people conform to belong to the group that they want to, is alive and well in the bullying scenarios.
I'm very interested in the dissonance between people's moral codes and organizations that espouse great values, and they're all written on the walls and printed on cards and handed out and repeated, put your hand on your heart and repeat our values. But when leadership portrays a different standard of moral justice and behavior, that does cause a dissonance in people, which people find difficult to contend with, I think, and that's not helpful.
No, it's not. Actually, early on, my first paper that I wrote was, I think, in 2004, was on sort of the, here no silly terms I used for them, but I went over about, at that time, 10 years of practice. And I had always been interested in, well, because I always said, well, go back to your organization and I'm sure HR or your leader will help you. Well, surprise, they didn't. These are the early days when I was a little naive. But the people that I saw um, weren't as harmed by an organization that was just upfront. This is the way we are. Don't like it, get out. We're mean, we're nasty, we're competitive. And then people would say, okay, I don't like you, I get out. Because they knew it. The other kind of organization was an organization that dealt with things, which there was pretty few of those back in the day and probably still. But the other organization that really hurt people were these government, big organizations that had these lovely mission statements, and people are our strength, and they had policy and they had procedure, they had everything in place, and then when something happened, they didn't do anything.
Yeah.
And that created that dissonance of, there's no justice here, there's no procedure, I've been betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect me. And that adds another whole level or layer of damage. And then when they keep trying to get justice, we add laws, they go to law, they go to disability, we get layers and layers and layers until the dissonance is so great that people collapse under it.
Yes, that kind of whole thinking for me around expectational justice is that why isn't my supervisor, my boss, my leader stepping in here? Why aren't they protecting me? What? Because again, it's about, I always say, all behavior is condoned. That good behavior is condoned, and you support good behavior by patting someone on the head and saying, "Great job, you're doing a fantastic job," and that condones good behavior. But bad behavior is condoned by silence. And yeah, that rage in silence. And these, of course, this is all affecting our brain structures. And I love what you were saying before about all, the hippocampus and the amygdala and all the bits and pieces in the brain, which we all have, that produce these chemicals. We're just big chemistry sets running around, aren't we? And I saw some fascinating research a number of years ago now on the effects of oxytocin being on regulating some of those things, and the it's often called the cuddle drug, or the orgasm drug, or whatever it is. It's produced under nicer circumstances. But the power of these chemicals to bring us back to earth again is fantastic. And so I'm intrigued by that side of things. And have you had to sort of look at those chemicals, or the serotonins and all the bits and pieces, to help understand what goes on inside of this complex head of ours?
You know, we know that we have four basic psychological needs that are each driven by various neurotransmitters. This is how we're wired as human beings. Um, we all have the same wiring. We may have different levels of neurotransmitters, but when we're exposed to situations that either enhance or damage the development of neurotransmitters, things change in our body. So we have a need to belong to a group. So belonging is serotonin, oxytocin. We have a need to be valued. We have a need um, um, to be safe. We have a need to have some control. So serotonin, dopamine, uh, all sorts of other chemicals are at play. And so if people are told they don't belong, if they're ostracized, excluded, verbally abused, then we're going to damage that system. It's not rewarding, it's not connecting. Well, the biggest thing we can do is create belonging in workplaces. Um, create the two things, create belonging and create compassion. And that doesn't mean let everything go haywire and all sorts of what people touchy feely or not be accountable for your behavior. It doesn't mean that, but it does mean that you create a group where the norms are that we care about each other, we have compassion when people mess up, and we deal with it in that kind of a way.
I'm
So
intrigued.
if we see somebody misbehaving, and this has been just drive me nuts over many years of identifying to organizations that someone is a bully and they do nothing about it. I'm saying the bully is going to destroy their own career, save them from that. And years, it takes a long time, but years later, the person is fired. You could have stopped that.
Yeah, that's right. You could have stopped that. It's interesting. Stephen Covey, the author and the leadership guru, which I only just found out recently, he's the son of the original author, Stephen Covey. I didn't realize the two were different, so he will forgive me for that. But he's just written a book called Trust and Inspire, in which he contends that the trust and inspire model of leadership is a far better model than command and control. But he asserts that 90% of our organizations are still run in a command and control model. Um, and for me, it's highly intriguing because just as you've said, he referred to the fact that people think trust and inspire is some kind of weak leadership model where there's no accountability, but far from it. It's just a different form of accountability. It's an encouragement rather than a regulation. So I guess it's kind of carrot rather than stick in that regard. But yeah, we have to create workplaces where people feel safe, loved, connected. I'm a great fan of Viktor Frankl's work in terms of some of the ideas which you've touched on exactly, really some of his thoughts around how to build these organizations. But I'm also intrigued um, by the correlation between these changes in our brain. And it was interesting when I was reading some research from UCLA on oxytocin, saying oxytocin was several times more potent than heroin and the effect on the body. I mean, these are incredibly powerful chemicals, and unfortunately, both negatively and positively, depending on the chemical which is being produced in the situation. But I'm intrigued by the change in brain structures because we have this huge workplace accident death rate in this country and a huge bullying, workplace and schoolyard bullying rates. And I'm intrigued, and one of the kind of odd stories, and it's a kind of a tragic piece of research, but this forgotten baby syndrome, which you may be aware of, when someone goes to work, puts the car in the parking garage, comes back 12 hours later, and their child is in the back seat dead. Um, and so I did some research around that, and when you research, you find out these are not, kind of people in poverty or people who apparently are neglectful. No, these are highly trained, highly skilled professionals. So somehow their work conditions are causing their brains to lose cognitive awareness, that they're highly skilled professionals that they would forget based on, I guess, stress and other work pressures and potentially bullying, that they had a child in the car. So tell me about the correlation between um, between bullying and potentially people making mistakes at work.
So we know that that bullying changes our ability to learn. We get our neurons die, or we don't create new neurons, or it impacts our memory to pull up how do you do something. It impacts the prefrontal cortex, which is where judgment lies. Um, it creates a loop where if we're searching for justice, that we get very ruminative on it. So if our brain is impaired, then all of our functions that we need to take to work, most specifically our executive functions, the ability to pay attention, the ability to make decisions, the ability to have judgment, and the ability to access our memory and learning. If the brain has been damaged there, then we simply can't do it. But the rest of it is, and this, probably applies to the forgotten baby syndrome, is, what we're working on right now is called our working memory. What we're doing right in the moment. And working memory is really small. It can, in any given moment, it can take in 4 to 7 bits of information when we're exposed to millions of bits of information. So if A, our brain isn't working well, and B, we're taking up working memory by ruminating about something, being stressed, or being in a hurry to get in somewhere in the baby situation, we've forgotten. There's not enough room in that working memory to remember something important. So somebody on a safety sensitive site who is like a machine that isn't like this always drives me crazy. Most businesses keep their machinery in perfect condition. They have all sorts of inspections and maintenance and care and red lines, and you get in the yellow line, they do something, but they'll stress people to death. They'll bully people to death. They'll fill people's brains until they're damaged and never notice it. So if you're going to work worried and stressed about being bullied and looking out for that. If your brain has been impaired because of exposure, you're going to work like a piece of equipment that's about to fail. And as a human being, you you may walk into something. I mean, I've probably debriefed 50 fatalities in my work career and hundreds of other near incidences. And what people tell me is, I just didn't see it in that moment, that one moment. So people need to come to work with their mind, the way the brain is um, capturing and processing, storing information, so that the brain and the mind and the person can function optimally and an accident doesn't happen.
I think your analogy of a piece of machinery which is about to break is a stunning one, and I think it's very, very relevant. And I think you're right. We like to look after our machines and make sure they're running perfectly, but the people who run those machines, not necessarily. And I think that's a stunning statement. Look, I'm a bit of a sentimental old fool when it comes to some things around leadership, I have to admit, because my naivety says that love wins in all circumstances. So, which is an odd comment to make amongst this conversation. But I think you and I both know that there are ways that we can treat people that fix, repair, and restore when people have been bullied. Obviously, that's the business that you're in. And in the workplace, even though someone has been amongst bullying, do you believe wholeheartedly that there are ways that leaders and colleagues can treat people that actually helps to repair the damage done to their professional standing, to their emotional state of mind?
I believe that the workplace, plays a critical role in that. You know, we know the role of social support in health, and it's critical. So, what people will tell me is, if a leader just says, we care about, we know you've been through something rough. What can we do to help? Uh, I will put things in place that protect you. Um, just small statements of care. Same with colleagues. I mean, it's hard because lots of times people have so much shame around bullying, they don't want to tell their colleagues that they're bullied. Or if the colleagues know they don't want to talk about it because they don't want to be seen as weak, but just treating someone kindly. How was your day? How are you doing? Glad to see you at work. Appreciate, give them value, love the work that you do, are very healing things. Now, having said that, there is often a level of damage that somebody needs to be off and away from the workplace to
Right.
heal.
Yeah.
They need therapy, they need time away. And so you have to have good disability management systems in place that aren't pressure, that understand this. So things like, I don't know what your workers' compensation is over there. I know it's WorkSafe in, uh, I think in Australia. Here we call it workers' compensation. But there's such pressure to get people back. They don't understand the psychological injury. So they phone the people, they push them. Um, they say they send them to a physician that doesn't understand the damage, and they get a very poor diagnosis so that they end up without coverage and can't be off work and can't heal. And all that does is deepen and deepen and deepen
Yeah.
the injury.
It's intriguing, Pat, actually, because recently I was dealing with a situation where somebody within a media company was bullied very badly by the CEO, actually, by the senior leader, and publicly humiliated by this leader in a lunchroom. I mean, it was an appalling situation. And then the person who was bullied was avoiding coming to work through the front door, was sneaking in the back entrance. I mean, just a whole range of things which were terrible. And in the end, their immediate supervisor boss said, "You need to take 2 weeks off, go and rest and recover." Within 24 hours of being off work, HR rang and said, "Of course, we're not going to pay for it. You're on your own time.
But
You're on
see,
your own money."
I frame this as a workplace injury. If you use the hazard model of workplace safety, there's a hazard that could have been mitigated but wasn't. Somebody was exposed to the hazard, got an injury, and then it becomes the organization's responsibility to provide whatever is necessary to heal from the injury. And not only that, but go back, prevent it, mitigate it, and follow the safety hazard process. So um, something like that, what you just described, will just incredibly damage that person more because it's another betrayal. And we have a thing called betrayal trauma. And if you're repeatedly exposed to betrayal trauma, you're more than likely to develop complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And this is a very serious injury. You can recover from it for sure, but you need therapy and you need an extended time away from the hazard.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the way you frame that. It's a hazard which was not mitigated. I think that's not dealt with. I think it's a great way of looking at it, and we need to do that, right? We need to consider that this is an injury, moral injustice injury. It's a mental health injury. We've invested billions and billions of dollars in the conversation around well-being at work.
Yeah.
And I have a very, I mean, I try and save people billions of dollars by saying, well-being is not a something. Well-being is a someone who hears and understands and intervenes, but not a popular view. But anyway, look, the conversation's been fantastic. I wish we had some more time, but I want to direct people, if I may, to your website because you are an active, not a passive member of this conversation. You're actively working with people and organizations at a very high level to help repair, fix, and prevent these kinds of situations that we're talking about. It's patferris.com, Ferris,
Yep.
Ferris, patferris.com. I so appreciate your conversation, and I really appreciate the 40 plus years of work you've put into this conversation. I know.
Why are you telling people that?
Sorry, I know. For a 30-year-old young woman, you've done a remarkable. So, but I appreciate what you're doing because we need people who are prepared to go deep in the subject and repair it. These are, and for employers and leaders listening, these are people's lives that we're dealing with. And what happens at work, the number of hours that you give at work, which is, I often talk about the irony here that a man called Samuel Parnell here fought for the 40-hour working week, and he is spinning in his grave because we don't do 40 hours, do we? We do 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and 100 hours a week. And so when you are dedicated to an employer and to an outcome and giving, 80 or 90 hours a week, we have to get that culture right, if we want, because it's about profitability, revenue, innovation, engagement, retention. I mean, all these things come right if we get ourselves right as leaders and our cultures. So Pat,
And it's not just about individuals and organizations, it's about the society that we accept and live in, about schools, about workplaces, churches, about how we treat one another. I'm reading a very fascinating book right now that's looking at generational differences in this crisis time. And the author is saying that as millennials, who are far more collaborative, cooperative, want kindness and order, as they become leaders, perhaps in this crisis time, they'll lead us through and make a difference. So I will put that out there in conclusion, that as a boomer who was very much this oh my goodness, this author just did cut the boomers in I don't know how many slices, so I'll apologize for my generation. Maybe the millennials will make a difference.
well, I certainly hope so, because we're not, as a fellow boomer, we've not done that well, and we need to look at it, and we need to be open to change, I think, and succession planning and making sure we're raising great leaders, and sometimes that means, putting our own ideas aside, I think. So, Dr. Patricia Ferris, thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, thank you. It's been a real pleasure to chat. I always learn something, from these things, and I thank you so much. And to everybody that watches this in New Zealand, I love your country. I've been there. I've been to Auckland. Beautiful place. So
fantastic. Well, we welcome you back anytime.
A bit of a difference.
Yeah, welcome you back anytime. And as I always say, we will always be smarter than me. So, Pat, thank you so much.
I love that. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Can you hear me now?